He sat alone on the cold concrete floor of the empty warehouse, the echoes of his footsteps still bouncing off the steel beams overhead. The world outside roared with noise, traffic, headlines, voices, but inside this cavern of silence, it felt like time had stopped. Just months ago, this warehouse had been alive with energy, buzzing with engineers, designers, and the fierce heartbeat of a dream. Now it was a graveyard of abandoned desks and coiled wires, and he was the last one left. His name was Ethan Vale. 3 years earlier, Ethan had been hailed as the next Elon Musk. At just 31, he had launched Etherworks, a bold startup promising to revolutionize clean energy with compact fusion technology. Investors threw hundreds of millions at him. The media adored him. He grinned from magazine covers, hailed as a genius who would save the planet. And for a while, it seemed like they were right. Etherworks grew like wildfire. They opened labs in 5 cities. They attracted some of the brightest minds in science. Their first public test generated enough energy to power a small town for a full hour, and overnight, Ethan became a hero. But behind the headlines, the pressure was crushing him. He stopped sleeping. He stopped eating. He micromanaged everything, terrified of letting go. He was obsessed, not just with changing the world, but with proving he was worthy of doing it. And then came the disaster. Etherworks' second major test, the one meant to prove they could scale their tech safely, ended in catastrophe. The reactor overheated and ruptured. No one died, but the lab was destroyed, and footage of the explosion went viral within minutes. Investors fled in panic. Lawsuits flooded in. The government launched investigations. Within 6 months, Etherworks collapsed. Ethan watched everything vanish: the labs, the teams, the money, the trust. Overnight, the world that had crowned him a savior called him reckless, delusional, dangerous. His name became a punchline. He sold his house, his cars, everything he owned to pay off debts. He let go of everyone. His closest friends stopped answering his calls. Even his parents begged him to walk away before it kills you. But what haunted him most was the silence. He remembered the final day at Etherworks, standing on the balcony as workers dismantled the sign with his company's name on it. The metal letters screeched as they came down, each sound tearing something from his chest. He went home, lay on the floor, and stared at the ceiling until morning. For weeks, he disappeared. No one knew where he was. He wandered aimlessly through quiet streets, through libraries, through the skeleton of the city at night. He thought about disappearing forever. He thought about how peaceful it would be to stop trying. But one night, as he walked past a small school, he saw the lights still on in a classroom. Curious, he peered through the window. Inside, a teacher and a handful of kids were building small solar-powered cars out of scrap metal and tape. They were laughing, arguing, cheering each other on. Something cracked inside him. These kids weren't waiting for someone to save them. They were trying, failing, trying again. They didn't care about investors or headlines or reputation. They just wanted to make something work. He stood there a long time, in the cold night, watching their tiny cars roll across the desk. And for the first time in months, something deep in his chest stirred. Not pride, not ambition, but wonder. The next morning, he walked into the abandoned warehouse that had once been Etherworks' first office. The power was cut, the walls were scarred with years of chaos, and the air smelled of dust and rust. And there, alone in the quiet, Ethan whispered, "This isn't the end." He picked up an old whiteboard from the corner, wiped it clean with his sleeve, and drew a single word in the center: Phoenix. Not a company, not a product, just a promise that he would rise from these ashes. He knew he had no money, no team, no credibility, but he still had one thing: the will to try again. The first thing Ethan learned about starting over was how loud silence could be. In the old Etherworks warehouse, the air seemed to hum with the ghosts of what used to be. The laughter of engineers, the click of keyboards, the low buzz of the fusion coils warming up before a test. Now there was only the scrape of his own footsteps on the dusty floor. No team, no investors, no press. Just him, a battered notebook, and a flickering lamp that barely pushed the darkness back. He began with nothing. No money, No partners, no credibility, and yet every day, he showed up. He treated the warehouse like a temple. He swept the floors. He built a crude workstation from scrap wood. He rigged up a small solar panel on the roof to power his old laptop. The work he did at first wasn't glamorous. He didn't chase the giant dream of fusion anymore. Not yet. He focused on something small, almost embarrassingly simple. Portable battery packs for off-grid schools. Cheap, durable, solar rechargeable. It seemed like a step backward from the audacious vision of clean fusion energy. But Ethan knew this time had to be different. He wasn't trying to impress the world. He was trying to rebuild trust in his work, in himself. He scavenged discarded lithium cells from recycling plants, testing and reconditioning them by hand. He melted down scrap aluminum to build casings. He soldered wires until his fingers blistered. Every night, he fell asleep on the warehouse floor, tools scattered around him, the hum of the city outside like distant thunder. Weeks blurred into months. Some days he felt unstoppable. Others he felt like a ghost clawing at the edges of the world. His mind was a battlefield, memories of his old life constantly trying to poison him. The headlines calling him reckless. The investors who had called him unfit to lead. The voice of his father saying, "Son, maybe it's time to get a real job." But when doubt clawed at him, he remembered those kids in the classroom with their scrap metal cars. He remembered the way their eyes lit up when something worked. That memory burned brighter than the fear. Eventually, he finished the first working prototype. It was ugly, bulky, and scratched, the kind of thing no one would ever put in a commercial catalog. But it worked. It charged from sunlight, held power for days, and could survive being dropped off a roof. He packed it into a worn backpack and biked across the city to the school he'd seen that night months ago. The teacher who'd been running the late-night club was still there, a woman named Ms. Rivera. She eyed him warily when he walked in, a scruffy man with sunken eyes and a backpack full of metal. "I'm not selling anything," he said quickly. "I just built something. For your kids." She frowned. "Are you that energy guy?" "Used to be," he said quietly. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. They tested the pack on a row of small laptops that had been sitting dead on a shelf. One by one, the screens flickered to life. The kids cheered. Ms. Rivera smiled. Ethan walked home in the dusk, the sound of their laughter echoing behind him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a failure. He felt like an engineer again. Word spread quietly. Ms. Rivera told another teacher, who told another. Soon Ethan was biking around the city delivering rough, handmade power packs to underfunded classrooms. He refused payment. Then one evening, he found a letter taped to the warehouse door. It was from a small nonprofit that worked to bring electricity to remote communities in Appalachia. They had heard about his work through a teacher. They wanted a partner. It wasn't a big offer, just a few $1,000s for supplies. But to Ethan, it felt like oxygen. He used the money to buy proper tools, safety gear, and better cells. The warehouse started to feel alive again. Slowly, carefully, he hired 2 volunteers from the nonprofit to help him. They were young, hungry, and idealistic. Exactly who he had once been, before ego had rotted him from the inside. Together they built dozens of packs, then hundreds. They shipped them to schools in Appalachia, then to clinics in rural Mexico, then to refugee camps in Greece. The media didn't notice. Investors didn't call. And that was perfect. He lived simply, ate cheap food, slept on a mattress in the corner of the warehouse. Every morning, he ran 5 miles before dawn, pushing his body as if trying to sweat out the ghost of who he used to be. Every night, he stayed up late running stress tests on his battery packs, watching them glow softly in the dark like fireflies. Slowly, the world started to whisper his name again, but this time, not as the genius who failed, but as the man quietly helping where no one else would. Then came the moment that changed everything. A massive winter storm hit a remote mountain town in Appalachia. Power lines snapped. Roads were buried in snow. The town went dark. But the little school there still had light, because they had a crate of Ethan's solar packs. A photo went viral. A line of children sitting under a single glowing bulb powered by one of his battered, hand-built packs, reading books in the storm dark. The post tagged him. The world saw it. And overnight, everything changed. Journalists called. NGOs called. Even a major energy company sent an email asking for a strategic partnership. Ethan sat in the warehouse, staring at the glowing screen. His hands shook. He had dreamed of this moment before, years ago, when Etherworks was rising. He had thought fame and funding would make him feel powerful. Now, it only made him feel cautious. Because he remembered what had come next last time. The storm photo swept across the internet like wildfire. One day, Ethan was soldering wires in silence. The next, his inbox was drowning. Reporters wanted interviews. Nonprofits wanted partnerships. Influencers wanted to collab. Even the same media outlets that once called him a reckless fraud were now calling him the comeback innovator. It was dizzying for the first few days. He ignored it. He kept his phone on silent, kept working, trying to pretend nothing had changed. But change crept in like a rising tide. The nonprofit that had first partnered with him sent more funding. The small team he'd built begged him to hire more people. They were exhausted, working 16-hour days to keep up with the flood of orders. He relented and brought on 5 more engineers, then 10. Soon the warehouse buzzed like it had in the old days. Laughter, clanging tools, the warm hum of machines running tests. And with it came something Ethan hadn't felt in years: pride. He caught himself one night, standing on the mezzanine, looking down at the organized chaos below, dozens of people building, testing, shipping, and for a moment he saw his old self again, the man who had ruled Etherworks like a general. It scared him. He forced himself to remember the wreckage of that empire, the sleepless nights, the shouting, the implosion. He had sworn never to let ego run him again. But fame is seductive. The photo from the storm wasn't the end. Soon videos of his packs powering remote hospitals, refugee schools, and disaster relief centers went viral. Celebrities reposted them. Donations poured in from around the world. Then came an email that made his chest tighten. The Global Energy Forum, the same prestigious stage that had once celebrated Etherworks before tearing it apart, was inviting him to speak as their closing keynote. His hands trembled as he read it. He remembered standing on that stage years ago, soaking in applause like sunlight, believing he was untouchable. He didn't want that man to come back. But he also knew this. Millions of people would watch that stage. Millions of young inventors, kids in classrooms, dreamers who thought they were too small to matter. If they heard his story, not the myth of genius, but the truth of failure and rebuilding, maybe it could light something in them. So he said yes. The weeks leading up to the forum were chaos. The media rediscovered him, running headlines about the phoenix of clean energy. Old investors sent him messages dripping with false warmth. Even his father called, voice soft with something like pride. "Be careful this time," his father said quietly. "I will," Ethan promised, though he wasn't sure how. The night before his speech, he stood alone backstage, staring at the massive, glowing logo of the forum. His heart thudded like a drum in his chest. He felt the old hunger clawing up from the dark corners of his mind. The hunger to be applauded, adored, worshipped. When his name was called, the applause thundered like a wave. He stepped into the lights. For a heartbeat, he saw a ghost of his old self reflected in the teleprompter glass. The arrogant prodigy who had thought he could bend the world to his will. Then he turned away from the script. "I failed," he said. His voice cracked through the silence. "I failed spectacularly." The crowd went still. "I built something too big, too fast, because I thought I had to prove I was extraordinary. When it collapsed, I lost everything. Money, friends, my reputation, even the belief that I deserved to be alive." He told them about the bathroom floor, the wandering, the night he saw the kids building scrap metal cars. He told them how he started again with his bare hands, one battery pack at a time. And he told them this: you don't need to be extraordinary to change the world. You just have to keep showing up, even when everything says you're done. When he finished, the hall exploded with applause. Not for his genius. This time, they were applauding his humanity. The video of his speech went viral overnight. Tens of millions watched it. Donations surged. Energy companies offered massive funding. Governments reached out about adopting his tech in disaster response. And for the first time, Ethan's name wasn't a punchline. It should have felt like triumph. Instead, it terrified him. Because he recognized the storm he had unleashed before, the wave of fame and pressure that had drowned him once. Soon, cracks began to appear. With the flood of funding came demands. Corporate partners wanted faster production, flashier designs, profit-sharing agreements. Lawyers hounded him about patents. His growing team was fracturing under the pressure. Arguments flared, deadlines slipped, corners were cut. Then, one night, a new prototype battery pack exploded during testing. No one was hurt, but the blast tore a hole through the wall and nearly burned down the warehouse. In the chaos, as alarms blared and smoke filled the air, Ethan saw it. The same fear in his team's eyes that he had once seen in his old team's eyes just before they walked out on him years ago. And in that moment, he realized something brutal. History was repeating itself. The warehouse smelled of smoke for days. The explosion hadn't injured anyone, but it had scorched the walls, shattered a window, and singed half the prototypes stacked in the corner. Firefighters had left behind a mess of wet debris and chemical foam. Ethan spent the night after the fire sitting alone on the cold floor, staring at the blackened wall where the blast had hit. The others had gone home, shaken and silent. And he knew what they were thinking. This is how it starts again. The whispers were already circling in the press. Rumors of recklessness, of safety shortcuts. Old headlines from his Etherworks days began resurfacing online, like ghosts clawing out of the grave. He barely slept. In the mornings, he walked the floor of the warehouse as if it were a battlefield, watching his team. They avoided his eyes. Conversations fell silent when he approached. A heaviness had settled over the place, the same cold tension that had once poisoned his old company in its final days. And he felt it inside himself too, the old poison creeping back. He was snapping at people, micromanaging, staying up until dawn rewriting other people's code. He hadn't eaten a real meal in days. He was grinding himself down like a blade against stone. Then came the meeting with the corporate partners, the energy conglomerate that had pledged the largest chunk of funding after his viral speech. They arrived in suits that cost more than Ethan's entire monthly payroll. Their smiles were thin. Their words were colder. They wanted speed. "Your public image is hot right now," one executive said smoothly. "We need to capitalize on that momentum before it fades. Faster production, global rollout, full monetization by Q4. Ethan stared at them. These packs are going to schools and clinics. They're meant to last, not make quarterly profit. The man's smile didn't flicker. Purpose is good for branding, but branding doesn't pay for growth. That night, Ethan lay on the floor of his office, staring at the ceiling, the old battle roaring in his head. He could take their offer. Scale fast, go global, become the titan the world wanted him to be. Or he could slow down, protect the mission, and risk everything collapsing again. The war inside him grew louder each day. Maya, the first volunteer he had hired, now one of his lead engineers, noticed the change. She cornered him after a long shift, her eyes dark with worry. "You're disappearing again," she said. "I'm working," he muttered. "You're unraveling." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, then stopped, because he could see it in her face, the same hollow fear he had once seen in his old team, years ago, just before they quit. That night, he didn't go home. He walked the city streets until dawn, haunted by a single thought that circled like a vulture. "If I keep this up, I'll burn it all down again." The next morning, he called an all-hands meeting. The team gathered in silence, expecting a reprimand, expecting the sharp, cold version of him that had begun to reappear. But when Ethan stepped up, his voice was quiet. "I need to tell you something I've never said out loud," he began. He told them about the end of Etherworks, not the public version, but the real one. The nights of screaming arguments, the paranoia, the ego that had turned him into a tyrant, the collapse, the bathroom floor. "I swore I'd never become that man again," he said, voice cracking. "But these past weeks, I can feel him coming back, and I need your help to stop him." The room was still. Then Maya said softly, "Then let us carry this with you. Not for you, with you." It broke something open in him. For the first time, he let go. He stopped working 20-hour days. He let his team take over decisions. He created new safety protocols and slowed down production, even though it meant losing some funding. He brought in independent auditors to ensure every pack was safe. The corporate partners hated it. They threatened to pull their investment if he didn't resume aggressive growth. Ethan stood in the glass conference room, staring at their polished shoes, and felt the fear boiling in his gut. Losing their funding could cripple everything. But then he thought of the kids in Appalachia, reading by the glow of his battered packs in the dark. And he said, "Then pull it." They blinked. "You'll collapse without us." Then I collapsed doing it right. He walked out before they could answer. 2 days later, they made good on their threat. Millions vanished from his accounts overnight. The team braced for disaster. But something else happened instead. The story leaked. The story of how he'd turned down corporate pressure to protect the mission. And the world lit up again. Not with mockery this time. With respect. Thousands of small donors stepped in to replace the lost funding. Teachers posted videos of their students chanting his name. Refugee aid groups sent letters begging to join his mission. They didn't want a profit machine. They wanted what he had almost forgotten he was building. Hope. And standing in the middle of the noisy, messy warehouse, Ethan realized something staggering. This wasn't his anymore. It belonged to them. And maybe that was the only way it could survive. Months passed, and something extraordinary happened. Without the weight of the corporate investors looming over them, the warehouse transformed. It didn't look like a factory anymore. It looked like a living heartbeat. Engineers worked side by side with teachers, volunteers, and even high school students who came in on weekends to learn. Ethan no longer stood above it all like a commander. He moved through it like a thread, fixing what he could, listening, laughing sometimes, disappearing into corners to sketch ideas on scraps of cardboard. He no longer tried to control everything. And the work thrived. The new safety protocols made the battery packs almost indestructible. Communities that had once depended on fragile diesel generators were now running classrooms, clinics, and shelters fully on his solar packs. Photos poured in. Children studying under glowing lights in storm-wrecked towns, surgeons operating during blackouts, refugee families warming their homes in winter darkness. The world noticed. Governments called. NGOs formed alliances. Even the same corporate giant that had pulled its funding sent a letter saying they admired his commitment and wanted back in. Ethan laughed and tossed it in the trash. But what mattered more than the praise was what happened inside him. For the first time in years, the silence in his head was gone. Not because the noise had come back, but because peace had taken its place. One evening, Maya found him sitting on the mezzanine, watching the team below as they boxed up another shipment. "Feels different now," she said. "It is," he replied quietly. "Because it's not mine anymore. It's ours." And he meant it. He no longer cared about being the center of the story. He wanted to vanish into the fabric of what they were building. So he did something no one expected. He called a press conference, not in a sleek hotel ballroom or a conference hall, but right there in the warehouse, surrounded by half-built packs and the smell of solder. Journalists gathered, cameras buzzing. Ethan stepped up to the microphone in his worn hoodie, looking nothing like the tech prodigy the world once crowned. "I built something once," he began, voice steady, "and I let my ego destroy it. I spent years trying to prove I was extraordinary, and I lost everything. When I started again, I promised I'd do it differently." He paused, looking out at the rows of flashing cameras. "So today, I'm keeping that promise." He announced that he was turning the company, now called Phoenix Systems, into a global nonprofit cooperative. The designs for the solar packs would be made fully open source. No patents, no ownership. Any community in the world could build their own. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters shouted questions. "Why give it away?" someone yelled. Ethan smiled. Because it was never about owning it. It was about making sure it exists. The press conference ended in chaos, and the story detonated online. He walks away from billions. Again, Ethan Vale gives away everything he built. The man who refused to sell his soul, celebrities tweeted about him. World leaders called him a visionary. Children painted murals of him holding a glowing light. But Ethan stayed in the warehouse. He didn't go to the interviews, didn't walk red carpets. He just kept showing up, working beside his team, soldering, and laughing. And somewhere far away, in a village he would never visit, a child opened a small glowing pack and lit up the darkness. That was enough. Weeks later, Ethan quietly stepped down as CEO. Maya took over. Theo became head of engineering. Ethan kept his old desk in the corner, where he still came every morning just to build things with his hands. No one called him genius anymore. No one called him failure either. They just called him Ethan. And he liked that. Months later, he was invited back to the Global Energy Forum, not as a keynote speaker this time, just to watch. He stood at the back of the enormous hall as Maya stood on stage and spoke about the future of Phoenix Systems. Next to her stood a young boy from Appalachia, now 18, who told the crowd how one of Ethan's first solar packs had powered his school during the Great Winter Blackout, and how he was now studying electrical engineering because of it. When the standing ovation erupted, Ethan didn't move. He just smiled, tears glinting in his eyes, and slipped quietly out into the sunlight. He walked the city streets as the crowd's roar faded behind him. He thought about the man who had once sat on a bathroom floor believing he had reached the end. He hadn't reached the end at all. He had simply reached the part where he had to break, so he could begin again. And he whispered, for anyone who might be listening, for anyone standing at the edge of their own ruins, you are not finished. You are just not done yet. And if you are hearing this, if your world has collapsed, if everything you built has turned to dust, don't walk away. You don't need permission to rise. You don't need applause to matter. You just need the will to try again. Because the world doesn't need perfect people. It needs broken ones who stand up anyway. So stand up. Start again. Now.